Here at the Alan Turing Institute, our mission is to make great leaps in data science and artificial intelligence research in order to change the world for the better.
This podcast explores the research, ideas and technologies behind the data revolution with the people responsible for shaping our future.
Welcome to the Turing Podcast. Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of the Turing Podcast. I'm Ed and I've got the full podcast team here today. Let's go around everyone. Hi B, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing okay. It's been a while. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. We're recording this on a lovely sunny day, which makes the lockdown a little bit less miserable. Rachel, how are you doing?
I'm good. I've already been outside in the sun today for a walk, but in the north, so it's still cold, unfortunately.
Totally get you.
It is February, so you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you can.
I think the sun tricked
so
me to be optimistic.
Yeah. Joe, how are you doing?
All good here. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, without further ado, let's get on to spinning Alan Turing's Wheel of Fun. Makes a noise. And the game that's been selected by Alan Turing's Wheel of Fun today, very special game indeed. Blind Data.
Oh.
Exciting. So Blind Data, what is it? The aim is to choose which mystery person from a selection of 3 sounds most interesting to grab a coffee with for a friendly, non-romantic date. The contestants could be either gender and are not necessarily single. But they are all living people from the worlds of science and technology. Try to hold off with saying who you think the mystery dates are until you've made the decision about who you prefer. And I'll start you off with a description of each mystery date first. Then you'll have the chance to ask one question of each of them, which I'll do my best to answer based on my knowledge of the person. Okay, are you ready to play Blind Data, everyone?
I have a pre-question.
Go for it.
What are the chances any of the 3 people you picked are listeners, and how much should we be embarrassed about?
Okay, so here's a clue. One of them is likely to be a listener of the Turing Podcast. I don't know how likely, but non-negligible chance.
Okay, so be nice, everyone.
Okay.
Yes, be nice.
I think we'd like to point out as well that unfortunately Ed's not dressed as Cilla Black to host this.
No,
I think it's slightly ruined the.
Yeah, I mean, we could have pretended that I was. I mean, it's an audio podcast, but anyway, I'm going to introduce.
We are truthful. We would
not lie to our. Yeah, we never lie to our audience. Yeah. I'm going to introduce mystery date number 1. So mystery date number 1 was born to a Greek Cypriot father and a Chinese Singaporean mother, and grew up in North London. A child prodigy in chess from the age of 4, your mystery date's creations have gone on to conquer more than just this game. Any initial reactions to mystery date number 1?
I'm intrigued.
Intrigued,
Me too.
okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. It would be fun for a coffee chat.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Okay,
Teach us some chess.
mystery date number 1. Yeah, sounding good. So I'm going to tell you mystery dates number 2's potted bio. Mystery date number 2 recently became one of the 100 richest Germans, with the value of their company, which they co-founded with their marriage partner, soaring to $21 billion. Your mystery date once said in an interview that even on the day of their wedding, they still made time for lab work.
Okay.
How do you feel about...
Wedded to their job.
Yeah.
Not quite as excited to go on a date with mystery.
Yeah, would they even have time?
Yeah, so I was going to say, they don't have time for coffee. We can just meet in the lab, I guess. We just bring the coffee to the lab.
Okay, so far we're feeling a little bit more positive about Mystery Date 1's chess playing skills for a date than Mystery Dates 2's love of lab. Okay, so Mystery Date number 3 has acquired a lot of titles over the years. In 2011, they became a knight, but most recently they became a president. They became a president. It's not the president.
Like the president of the world.
Okay, so Mystery Date number 3. It's possible you may have met this mystery date.
I think I know this mystery date.
you think don't reveal who you think it is yet. Okay.
I have a very important question. Would all three of us at the same time, we have to agree on the same person that we would have coffee with?
No, I want all of you to choose independently, but okay. I'm going to only offer you one question of each date between the three of you. So mystery date number 1, what would you like to ask about mystery date number 1?
Well, I don't know if you guys agree. Like, what does he do apart from chess? Like, I do like chess, but I'm not the greatest at chess. So maybe, he could teach me that, but maybe he does other things that I understand better.
Yeah, like other sports or just other hobbies.
Yeah.
Other hobbies. Okay. So fortunately for you, I do remember having read an interview article about this person once. And this person, I remember, does like to do a lot of coding in their spare time as well as work. And apparently sometimes enjoys listening to either classical music or drum and bass whilst coding.
Oh.
Pretty standard choices.
Yeah, I wonder how different their code comes out with those two choices.
Just add some EDM and suddenly you have them through.
Very hyperactive code, yeah. Okay, so you've had your question of mystery date number 1. So mystery date number 2, who's one of the 100 richest Germans, do you have a question you'd like to ask to learn more about this person?
So my question is similar, do they have any hobbies?
I was going to ask about what field of lab do they work on? Is it like a biology, a physics, drugs? I don't know. Anything possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't want to be too specific, but certainly biology is correct out of those you just mentioned. Drugs is also definitely in the right ballpark. And I'm going to say there's a specific genre of, I don't know if you necessarily categorize it as a drug, but something that you give to people perhaps to prevent them getting ill in the first place. That this person has developed one of those, perhaps, possibly.
So not to get too specific, but a preventative drug.
It's like finding a needle in a haystack.
And mystery date number 3, who has a lot of titles, would you like to ask a question of this person? What would you like to know about them?
I just want to say hi, mystery date number 3, before we ask anything.
He or she may be listening, yeah. Go on, what would you like to know about mystery date number 3? They're a knight, and most recently they've become a president.
Specific.
I'm gonna say it's, if I give you the exact answer, it might be a bit too specific, but I'll give you an answer to that question, which is that they've become president of a British society. Okay. Joe's nodding. She knows who this is.
I'm clueless in all 3, so that's brilliant.
Okay. So I'm going to go through each of you and let you decide who you want to take on a date, and then let you have a guess of who you think that person is. So let's go with B first. Which of our 3 mystery dates would you like to go to grab a coffee with?
So the first one is a coder, and I'm a coder myself, so we could at least, communicate on some level. But the second one invented something cool that now I want to know more about. So I would also have questions. And also, number 3 is a knight. Who doesn't want to have, grab a coffee with a knight? It's like, what are you doing today? Grabbing it. Exactly. It's like
a
grabbing
coffee,
a coffee.
or maybe a tankard of ale, perhaps.
What? See, is that, what would you do? But I think that I'm gonna go with mystery date number 1, and I will talk about code.
Okay.
Potentially chess.
Do you want to guess now, or should we wait until everyone else has chosen?
Let's try to. I would like not to guess, but let's wait for everyone.
Okay, let's let everyone else choose first. Rachel, who would you like to go on a date with?
I am also going to go on a date with mystery guest number 1. I think they could teach me chess, which is always a useful skill to have. I'm not very good at it, and I quite like coding, but I'm also not good at that, so they can teach me coding as well. So I feel like the most useful in terms of building my skills.
Nice. A good answer. Joe, who would you like to choose of the 3 mystery dates?
So I'm going to pick number 2. I think, work ethic sounds admirable.
Yeah.
But only obviously if they can actually find time to go for a coffee with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so we've chosen, B and Rachel have chosen mystery date number 1. Can you all guess who mystery date number 1 might be? Anyone got any ideas?
I feel like I have read articles about him or them, but as in the biography sounds familiar, but I have no reference of name or anything, so that's not very helpful.
Okay, but have you got any clues about who you think it might be, or who they work for, perhaps? Okay, not sure. Okay, anyone else got any ideas, or?
No.
Okay,
Joe and I nodding because the listeners can't know that we're just frantically saying no with our heads.
Well, B and Rachel, I can reveal that you're going on a lovely non-romantic date with Demis Hassabis, CEO of DeepMind, the AI company.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool.
Sounds cool, right? Yeah.
Yes. Good networking.
A positive reaction.
Mystery date.
Nice, thank you. Okay, so Jay, you chose mystery date number 2. Do you want to have the first guess of who you think that might be?
No.
I think he might be the CEO of a manufacturing company that's just made some vaccines.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's correct.
That's where I'm at.
That's where you're at. Could anyone go any more specific than that? No. Okay. Fair enough.
Is it COVID vaccines? Is that?
It is COVID vaccines. I think this is a really tough one, in fairness. So the contestant number 2 is, in fact, Özlem Türeci, if I pronounce her name correctly. And it's her rather than him, because she is the chief medical officer of BioNTech, the company that she started with her husband, Ugur Sahin, that collaborated with Pfizer on the coronavirus vaccine that many people are being injected with at the moment.
Great. We're going to have a great coffee.
I was going to say, Joe is getting the connections to get the vaccine early, guys.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. It's a massive ploy.
Okay, yeah, so definitely some benefits there from networking. Okay, so no one chose contestant number 3, who is the person I thought would be most likely to listen to the podcast.
She's terrifying. I'm so sorry.
I think Joe knows who it is, though. So Joe, this person who became a knight in 2011 and more recently a president, who do you think it is?
Is it our very own Institute Director, Adrian Smith?
It is. Well done. Good guess. And
Good guess.
Yeah, if you're listening, Adrian, then I'm really sorry that they didn't choose you. I should have bigged you up more. I mean, I thought knight and president. Wow. Could it get any better than that?
The truth is, we had our suspicions, and there is a chance that we had coffee in the same room.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good point. You may have already had coffee with him, so it makes sense to choose the others, yeah. Fair enough. All right. On that note, that concludes Blind Data. Thank you, everyone, for playing. And so we'll now move on to today's guest for the Turing podcast, which is Dan Stowell. We'll introduce him momentarily, but it's also me. B and Joe interviewed me and Dan on some research that we did last year on solar photovoltaic databases. So let's look forward to that. Welcome to another episode of the Turing Podcast. Today we're joined by Dr Dan Stowell, who is a senior researcher and co-lead of the Machine Listening Lab at Queen Mary University of London, as well as a fellow of the Alan Turing Institute. Today we'll be talking to Dan about his work at Turing in collaboration with Open Climate Fix and OpenStreetMap on addressing climate change through solar panel mapping, and the paper he's recently had published in Nature Scientific Data on this topic. It also happens to be research that I've been involved in personally, as you'll go on to hear. So Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Good to be here.
Hey Dan, I think before we dive into any research, it might be good if you could tell us a bit about why solar energy is actually important, particularly in the UK where we often have very little sun.
Yeah, absolutely. We often hear different things in the news about which countries are doing well and which countries are doing badly at renewable energy and so on. One of the great things about the UK is that we have phased out a lot of old-fashioned fossil power pretty quickly, so we've got rid of a lot of coal power. And the UK, just like a lot of other countries, is increasingly relying on renewable sources. And the other thing that's often discussed in the news is, but are these reliable? Are they predictable? Can we rely on them just as much as we can rely on coal or nuclear? And it is an important question. It's an important question because the amount of power that the national grid delivers to all our homes, actually that has to match exactly the generation against the demand. So moment by moment that has to match. So if we have a lot of solar panels connected to the grid, as we do, and we don't really know exactly how many of them are going to be covered by cloud and how many of them are not going to be covered by cloud, then there's a little bit of uncertainty in there. So we want to be able to match exactly against the number of kettles that people have turned on in the country. But if we don't know in let's say, a minute or 10 minutes at a time, how much power is coming from the solar part of the grid, then we need to have a bit of a backup baseline. So we need to have gas generators running at slightly below power, slightly below their kind of optimal generation, which means that we can then ramp them up or down. We can use them as the control to help us match supply against demand. So the point is, we need to understand our solar capacity really well because it's an increasingly large part of the mix. And the better we understand where it is and when it's generating, the less we need to rely on inefficient uses of fossil power backup.
In some places, it's quite easy to see how much solar you get because in Manchester is roughly zero. It's always grey and cloudy, so I can attest to that.
So I come from the north of England, and so yeah, I can agree with that. But it actually we've done this mapping project, and it's astonishing how many solar panels and solar farms people are willing to install up and down the country. It's definitely concentrated in the south, but it actually, it does relate to all of us.
But tell us, what are some of the challenges in estimating the total solar capacity for the country? And why is this something that wasn't already known?
Yeah, this is something that I get asked a lot, because if I say we're trying to find the geolocation, let's say, of all the solar panels in the country, they say, why don't you just ask the government? Or why don't you just ask the national grid? And that's perfectly reasonable. There are a few different answers to that. Like, firstly, a lot of solar power, because it's sort of micro generation, a couple of solar panels here and a couple of solar panels there. These things, they're not often integrated into some big, massive database of exhaustive details of everything. And even if they are, they're often kind of privacy concerns. So we don't have a big register of everyone's name against the solar panel they own. There are various things going on there. But the other thing is, if we want to predict how much solar energy is being generated by the solar panel on my roof or your roof, we need to know the exact geolocation, let's say to within 10 meters, something like that. Whereas if we want to just bill someone or pay someone for the solar that they generate, we actually don't care if it's within 10 meters. We'll take the postcode and that's enough. So what it means is that even though in the UK kind of information environment, we've got quite a lot of open data, and we've got quite a lot of open data about things like energy, it often is missing some of the important parts of the picture that you want if you're going to use it for these new purposes.
I think the key thing here is that we don't know exactly even what the potential capacity of the UK's solar panels and solar farms is, right? So speaking as someone who's also involved in this research, that was the first thing we started to look at, which was what are the possible sources of even knowing that information? And then as you mentioned, you've got to consider, well, what would the real world capacity of these things be, given their location, given the how much sunlight there's going to be, and so on. But that part comes later. I think I'm going to ask you the next question now, which is based on the fact that we don't have the good reliable information from the existing data sets that come from government and elsewhere on the potential solar capacity across the country of all of these different solar panels and solar farms that different people have. You looked into using data from OpenStreetMap. Now, can you tell us a bit about what OpenStreetMap is and how we were able to get information on solar panels and solar farms from there?
Yeah. OpenStreetMap is this. It's one of these funny things where the name is perfect, but also not perfect, because it sort of tells you, okay, it's open, as in open data, open source, or whatever, and it's a map of the world. So yeah, it's got a massive wealth of mapping data that you might use to find your own street. And it's a bit like Wikipedia, but for maps or for geographic data. It's not just a single map.
People are going to think of Google Maps when you say that. So I guess what's the difference there? Because everyone can go on Google Maps and see the map of the world and put in the coordinates, but this is different from that.
Well, the difference is the first word, open. So open means, open data is not just that you can access something for free, but it's also open in that we explicitly say in advance that people can do all kinds of things with this data without our permission. And that's the principle that's made Wikipedia basically the encyclopedia that the world uses. And it's the same principle that's in a whole lot of scientific work that we do. Not many people remember now that before Wikipedia, in, let's say, the 90s, there were various sorts of electronic encyclopedia, and these were very professionally published, and people would pay a lot for a DVD-ROM or something like that. And then Wikipedia came over, and it was just someone who decided on the internet to just let anyone edit an encyclopedia. And what happened was that openness and crowdsourced potential became how it is, this open thing that is the encyclopedia. And even though you might not think that's going to happen right now with maps, I've been involved in OpenStreetMap for a long time, and it used to be this crazy niche thing that people did where they ride around with a GPS receiver on their back, riding around on a bicycle trying to find the exact sort of latitude, longitude of various streets and things like that.
It's interesting that you say bicycle because, Google can afford to have cars going around doing that. So.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, it was just one bloke cycling around London. That's how it started. But it wasn't me. No, it wasn't me. But it's good. But the lesson from Wikipedia is that true openness that kind of respects the people contributing to it in the sense of treating them as peers, as sort of equal members, that can potentially just sort of take over and replace commercially sourced stuff such as various companies produce. And it's not going to replace everything. I mean, Wikipedia doesn't replace everything. It doesn't replace all the academic papers in the world and all the commercial newspapers and all these things. But OpenStreetMap is really increasingly being used by a lot of commercial providers, a lot of different community projects to have geographic data for all kinds of things. So, for example, it's used by humanitarian organizations, and this is something that amazed me. In a lot of humanitarian situations, you have there was a particular crisis with the typhoon in the Philippines. This is a few years back. And the first thing you think if you're going to fly a load of helicopters into a place and try and deliver aid is, where are the villages, the towns, the population? Where are the roads that we can use to get supplies to these things? And you think, okay, they'll probably get some kind of government map or something. But in a place like the Philippines, they just didn't have it. The government did not have this information about where the villages were. And that's strange to us from a Western point of view, but it's really, really common. So even really, really serious things like humanitarian organizations going and delivering aid to thousands and thousands of people, they can now rely on OpenStreetMap as the tool they use to get that done.
Is that because I guess anyone can edit it in the same way as Wikipedia? You're not reliant on, say, if you were using Google Maps, to just wait for them to get around to covering a particular area.
Yeah, it's exactly that. So a company such as Google, I don't particularly want to pick on Google as the example, so I'll try not to, but, a company can have self-interested reasons for doing things, and that's why rich cities tend to be very well mapped. But it can also have noble reasons for doing things, or disinterested. They can have a foundation which goes and does nice things. But the benefit that we've seen in OpenStreetMap is the power of crowdsourcing. That thousands and thousands and thousands of people can just get together in order to fill this gap.
So just to bring that back to the solar panels, then, how did that become? Was there a particular initiative or push to get the open source community to go and look for those places where there are solar farms, and it's also rooftop solar panels, of course, as well, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, so that one's kind of interesting, because if you don't know anything about the UK power sector, or any power sector actually, it's kind of surprising. You might think these massive wind farms and solar farms, but let's talk about solar. These massive solar farms are generating, all of the solar power, and my little solar panel on the roof isn't doing very much. But in fact, about 1/3 of the UK's solar generation capacity is rooftop solar. There's lots of them all adding up, and so they really, really make a difference to the amount of renewable energy we have in the country. So where this all started was, I've been involved in OpenStreetMap for a while, and I do a lot of machine learning, data science, all these other things as part of my academic work, and was never really involved in anything to do with renewable energy. And then one day, on Twitter, someone called Jack Kelly, who's in fact co-launched a project called Open Climate Fix, he asked out loud, would it be a crazy idea to use OpenStreetMap to build a database of all our the UK's power infrastructure, and especially the renewable power infrastructure? And yeah, so what happened was, I just sort of responded to that and gave some ideas, but eventually it kind of snowballed, and people in the OpenStreetMap UK community were kind of interested, because we all like to sort of contribute useful things to the world, whether it's professionally or in your spare time. And we didn't have a map of all the solar farms or all the solar panels in the country, and it's something that we could just sort of step in and do. So yeah, the great thing is that community involvement just sort of came from that, but also a little bit more formal kind of project involvement. So, we had some funding from the Turing Institute to help us do this, and we had a couple of other organisations involved. So yeah, it really just snowballed from this sort of innocent question out there.
To hear that scientific collaborations can get started on social media, especially nowadays when they're probably less likely to be started spontaneously in the office.
There are some really weird things it's just completely unexpected things that come about from this. So, there's one person called Russ Garrett who created a kind of map visualization of the power data, and he was doing it for his own purposes, and it's just a really nice map. But that actually sort of fed into the whole project. Meanwhile, there is someone called Jerry who was doing a lot of local mapping in his area around kind of the Coventry region. And when this whole topic came up, he went back through a load of photos that he'd taken while he'd been out mapping local areas. And he just happened to have all these photos where he could see solar panels that had never been spotted before. So just all these completely unexpected things coming together. And it actually, in a funny sense, lockdown helped, because there were quite a few people who during the COVID lockdown didn't have much to do, so they helped out by scanning through aerial imagery and looking for solar panels and helping us pinpoint them.
It's great to see that kind of big citizen science initiative. At least there's something positive coming out of lockdown in that sense.
If someone had a solar panel on their roof, say, could they get in touch and find out whether you've mapped it, or kind of what's the, is there any way of doing that? I mean, there's lots of houseboats near me, as like an example, that have solar panels on their roofs, but obviously they move around a lot. So
yeah, that's a tricky thing. Houseboats that move around. I think this is one of the things that we have to think about when we think about like automatic recognition and so on. That's a bit of a complication. But that aside, so anyone can go to openstreetmap.org. That's just the main website. But for any kind of OpenStreetMap, visualize it. Any OpenStreetMap, you go to it, search for your location, and you can look at the data that's there. And just like Wikipedia, you just click edit, and you can actually go and edit it yourself. So people can feel free to put their own solar panels into the map, and that's really great, because obviously they know a little bit more about their solar panels than everyone else does.
I'll have to have a look. I think there might be some of my buildings, so I'll have to see if they've been captured. So my next question is to Ed. So Ed, you're wearing two hats today. You're podcast host and you're involved in this project. So can you tell me exactly what you were doing on this project? How were you involved?
So I'm part of the Alan Turing Institute's research engineering group, and we sort of we're software engineers who work with different academics on projects. And I was working with Dan at the start of this year, the end of last year, on this. And really it was like getting together the first steps of this what was ultimately produced, which is this data set that Dan's published a paper on. And it was compiling the data that's coming in from OpenStreetMaps that Dan's just been describing with some of the information from the government's data set that that already existed. So we had a look, and there are a few different options that we could have used of existing, spreadsheets online and so on. There was this one called the Renewable Energy Planning Database, which was quite useful, and we were able to sort of cross-reference that against what we were seeing in OpenStreetMaps. So I was doing some of the data science there in creating that data set initially. But then, as Dan mentioned, since the time when I actually initially worked on it, there's obviously a lot more that's been added to the OpenStreetMaps data itself.
Astonishing, because we had this project which was ended in March 2020, and we were like, okay, now we've finished, and then lockdown happened, and so much more data came in. It was crazy. Yeah,
timed it better in some ways.
Well, that was one of the this is obviously a climate change related project, right? I mean, the whole aim of mapping solar panels is to know, get a better estimate of the amount of energy going to the grid, which means we won't have to use as much fossil fuels. But a lot of the climate change related projects that people would again, being a scientist, our chosen social media appears to be Twitter. And the things I was seeing tweeted from people who are working on climate change stuff at the start of lockdown was like, oh, wow, this is an amazing time to collect data with less traffic. And, there are all of these. It was like a natural experiment for a lot of things. And I guess, in this case, the solar panels aren't moving around or changing. But yeah, the difference was that people had more time on their hands to bother doing these sorts of things. I wonder if the edit rate of Wikipedia spiked as well. I don't know. We'd have to ask someone who knows about that.
Like scientists back in the beginning of the lockdown, like, yep, I'm technically breaking the rules, but this is for work. I'm walking 2 hours away from home, but I have a camera and I'm spotting things and the police can do anything. All the rebellion, the secret scientific rebellion. I have a question though. Why can't the government data sources you use be relied upon as a gold standard? Because that's what you would expect, right? The government would have the proper gold standards for things like location and the capacity of the solar farms.
Yes, the government gold standards. The government does have some good data, and they have processes in place to get this data. There are quite a few different reasons why it isn't quite obviously the gold standard that we might think, and I'll try and think of the most important ones rather than boring you with all of them. But one thing is that the way that the government's say renewable power policies have changed over the years. So it was there was the end of the original kind of feed-in tariff, which was a couple of years ago, and what happened was the feed-in tariff, which pays people for producing renewable energy. That was the project that collected for the government data about new domestic solar panels going online, and then when that scheme finished, that sort of data collection finished. So there's a bit of a gap there. The other thing is this main thing that I mentioned about location, because we need pretty exact locations, and the main thing that does get gathered is sort of postcode type locations, and in a city a postcode can be quite precise, but in the countryside a postcode is not precise because they sort of cover a similar amount of houses essentially, and so in the countryside a postcode can cover a massive range. Also, the postcode isn't exactly where the solar panels are. We found this example, which is we put it into the research paper because it's quite dramatic, which is this very big Ministry of Defence site, which is it's a big site with kind of I think a decommissioned airfield on it. So what they put on the decommissioned airfield was a whole load of solar panels. This is obviously a really big geographical area, but according to the government, the location of this solar panel was basically at the door to the Ministry of Defence site, not on the airfield, which is more than a kilometre away. So if the government's data was could be as over a kilometre wrong, then it's not going to be ideal for predicting which clouds are going to drift over your solar panels.
Right, and I think that's an important thing to highlight here. Why are we so concerned about location rather than just knowing how much energy these solar farms are going to produce? But it's because the next stage of the research is related to cloud cover, right? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's something that Jack Kelly, who sort of started the ball rolling, is working on in his Open Climate Fix thing. That is all about using this data together with predictions of cloud cover to then say, let's imagine for every single solar panel in the UK, we're going to predict 1 hour in advance if it's going to be covered or not covered, and essentially how much it's going to be generating.
Right. Yeah, but the two things we've highlighted here, the location and the just knowing the sort of maximum capacity of each solar farm or solar panel, are obviously going to be prerequisites to doing anything further, in that regard.
Yeah.
Comfortable with government information right now. Anytime.
I want to mention one thing actually, which is a lot about the work that Ed was doing on the data, which is the relatively unglamorous side of like data science in sort of taking different data sets and smooshing them together, because we can have this OpenStreetMap stuff.
It didn't feel glamorous. No.
You got the OpenStreetMap data in one hand and you got some government data in the other hand, and you're like, okay, we'll just put these two together. But especially given what I've just said, which is that things might be the same object even though they're a kilometre apart, together with the fact that some of the data sets that we are using don't have like official identifiers for each item, it's actually really tricky. So you've got this what's often called a matching problem in data science. We want to sort of take these things and connect them together so to eliminate duplicates, but also to try not to miss anything. And so a lot of what Ed was doing and what the Turing project was all about was taking multiple data sources and combining them together and trying to, not do it by hand, but to come up with rules and database processes that would let us actually join things up in a way that meant we wouldn't come back to it 3 months later and go, oh no, now we have to do it all over again.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that a bit, and it sort of answers B's question a bit about why the government source dataset can't be used as gold standard, and also to point out why doing data science with real world data is so difficult. I'll give an example, which was just like one of the entries in the government data we mentioned, the renewable energy planning database, was like a solar panel scheme as opposed to a particular solar farm. And then what that mapped onto in the OpenStreetMaps, as we could see, was it was a whole sort of area where there were lots of rooftops with solar panels who were perhaps under this scheme, but the government dataset was not in any way like recording how many of them there were, or whether they were all the same capacity each, or what the total capacity was. And so, yeah, bringing in this completely outside data source and trying to link it on the geolocation, which is of course what we had to use. It was a challenge, and that this is the kind of real world stuff you do with data science. But I think hopefully when our listeners, if they want to check out the paper and see what the eventual data set looks like in the end,
it's beautiful.
It works out for the best. It's beautiful. Okay.
No bias here at all.
Saying no bias.
So I suppose, so my next question is, you mentioned in the research paper that you estimate that the UK solar capacity could be as high as 16 gigawatts. How confident are you in this, Dan? And what do you think this means for the UK's energy policy? I mean, the government released its 10-point plan last week. It talked a lot about renewable energy, I suppose, in the sense of offshore wind farms. But yeah, I suppose I'm quite interested in this.
Yeah. Well, on the 10-point plan, I don't really have much to say about that, because it doesn't, I think, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't really affect the solar side of things very much. I mean, the best news, I think, from recent things is that it seems that onshore wind farms are now back in favour with the government, because that's really important, and the discontinued support of that was a big problem. So, but in terms of the total number of gigawatts of solar power, and it's really interesting because my background is not in power, and so I was as surprised as anyone else by some of these things, that you come in and you say, okay, how much solar capacity does the UK have? And the government says, well, we've got a couple of guesses. and you what? Okay, I'll ask the National Grid, and the National Grid are like, well. So, there are various different sources of estimates, and there are some definite things like the number of big solar farms in the country. That's quite, very confident about what is actually connected and producing. But for example, if we've got all these solar panels on people's roofs, some of them haven't been connected yet. Some of them might have broken. So there's all kinds of sources of uncertainty. And what we have in the paper is that it's about 13 gigawatts that's quite confidently known, and the topping up to 16 gigawatts is by inferring capacity for bits and pieces that we're not quite sure about. So there's definitely a kind of margin of error in our own estimates, and that's absolutely sure. I think there is, I'm afraid I can't remember which government department right now, but I think it might be BASE. There's some government estimates being produced by government data scientists, and those are produced from similar sorts of data as we have. You know, they access the listings of solar farms and so on. So, estimates vary, and they vary between, let's say, 12 and 16 and things like that. The other thing that you really have to bear in mind is that solar power and a lot of renewable energy are really on this upward curve at the moment. So if you want to know how much solar power is installed, do you mean right now? Do you mean a year ago? Do you mean 2 years ago? Because the differences between those are actually massive. Because it's not exactly exponential, but you can think of it a bit like an exponential growth, which means all of the stuff that's more recently come online is all the big stuff. So you have this dual problem of inherent uncertainty and quite quickly going out of date. And that's another reason why it's quite good to do this kind of crowdsourced thing where people can add new data as and when.
I'm going to say that definitely sounds like we were at an advantage here using the OpenStreetMaps data, because that is, as you said, something that can be continuously updated. And so I was going to ask a question. You kind of answered this earlier, but what is the sort of benefit of this data set, it being open? So you've published this in Nature Scientific Data, and it's called a harmonized high coverage open data set of solar photovoltaic installations in the UK. And so, of course, as well as it being a published paper, the data set is, as you mentioned, open for people to use and repurpose, presumably in whatever way they see fit. So exactly how open is that? Is that as open as I'm suggesting?
It is. It's under a license which is basically OpenStreetMap has this open data license, and it's under the same open license as that. And it's not quite the same as a Creative Commons license, but it's extremely similar, and it has this basic similar level of openness that you can almost do anything you like as long as you give proper credit. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's the headline. And
anyone who uses it got to credit us.
sort of, yeah. So the thing is, one of the things that I think a lot of people are often surprised about is that you can do commercial work with this, and this is really important, especially if we're dealing with the power sector, right? It's not that you can do stuff with it, but you're not allowed to make money. It's really open, right? You can National Grid or EDF Energy, anyone can make use of this data, and or even a new startup. And one of the things that I really like about this open approach is that people can come up with things that we have no idea about in advance, So we wanted to do this in order to predict cloud cover. We've talked about this, but because this is basically just a geographic data set of solar power, people can do all kinds of things. They can look at, for example, socioeconomic factors. Does the type of housing or the type of local government influence what's going on in solar deployment? Does the type of housing stock affect it? That's a sort of research thing that people might want to do. On the commercial side, you might have a startup that tries to target different areas of the country to try and go and sell solar panels, and you want to know, how much is there already? So all these different things which are completely unrelated to our primary mission. We're enabling things to do, enabling all sorts of people to do things we haven't thought of, and that's my favourite side of it.
Sort of part of what we were trying to achieve was that when new data came in, whether it's from a new government dataset or a batch of OpenStreetMaps data, that the method could then just be rerun and the combined dataset just regenerated. So now that it's been published, will that process still be ongoing as people keep adding stuff?
I think that's a really interesting sort of strategic question, and so I think there are two. You can sort of treat it in two different ways. One is that yes, it will. You can continuously update it because the methods and the source code and so on. That's all open and online, and we can rerun it. You can rerun it. Anyone can. So the method is there, and you rerun it whenever you need the freshest data. But the other side of it is that we put quite a lot of effort into validating and sort of manually inspecting to make sure that nothing had gone wrong. And now, if you're going to do something like providing power to an entire nation, you might want to validate your data a little bit, right? You might want to just sort of check things through rather than just slurping in new data unquestioningly. There are a few different things you can do. I mean, you can put automatic checks in to try and add some sort of automatic validation, but perhaps the best approach going forward is if we or if someone else does a sort of manual refresh of the data once a year or once every 6 months or something, so that there is a stable and sort of a method it's not a moving target. If we say now that we are this much confident that the data is very dependable, and then all of a sudden a whole new load of data comes in from some random people we've never met, for a lot of, certainly in the power sector, for a lot of applications, people are going to be a little bit dubious.
Yeah, this is more real world data science problems here, isn't it? I mean, it'd be nice to think that we could just make this amazing method that accounts for any oddities in the new data that might come in, and that it could automatically create new versions of the data set. But when it's something that, regardless whether it's someone editing OpenStreetMaps, like a person editing Wikipedia, they might edit in such a way that's different from other users, or whether it's the input data set being government data set or spreadsheets, there might be rows of data that have characters in we didn't expect or something. So yeah, there's always going to be manual steps to data science as well as automated steps.
Simulator thing. There was this great thing. There's a Microsoft flight simulator, and they use OpenStreetMap data to build this kind of map of the world with 3D buildings and so on. And there's this lovely example in the past year where someone had accidentally put into OpenStreetMap a building which had something like 60,000 floors. Right, so the height of the building was like 60,000 floors or something like that. So if you fly around Australia, I think, in Microsoft Flight Simulator, you could see this ridiculously large building. And of course, Microsoft are sort of ingesting the OpenStreetMap data and processing it in all sorts of ways, and there's definitely like some validation and whatever. But they just didn't think of this particular corner case, and so that came through into the flight simulator. And so you see really visually and thankfully in a safe way, but you get to see kind of the impact of ingesting data from third-party sources. Yeah.
I was just thinking that with a building that high, you would have to have like sittings in the lifts and possibly some motion sickness tablets for people.
Yeah.
You're like,
you might need to have kind of.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like, I'm downstairs. I'll take 2 hours to arrive. Wait.
Yeah, let me just correct my watch for the different relativistic effects.
Yes. So. How you already told us a little bit about how this data set can be used in the future, But what can you tell us about anything that you are going to be doing, ongoing parts of the research by yourself or your collaborators?
Yeah, I'll start with the big picture. One of the reasons that I love doing this project is that we get to take some of our skills in data science, machine learning, and things like that, and use them for what is obviously a good thing, trying to help with the climate crisis. And another part of, in fact, a big part of my work is about animal monitoring and biodiversity. And I think, although it's very different data, I'm really pleased that I get to be able to use, data science skills to be able to help with both the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. So that's the big picture. In the more immediate case, we're taking this data that we've got about solar panels, and we want to use that partly to train machine learning that can spot solar panels. Okay, so now that we've got the ground truth of some people, thousands of people have annotated solar panels for us, we can combine that with aerial imagery or even street level imagery and use that to help train machine learning to detect things. So the great thing about that is if we train machine learning to do that, then we can help to sort of finish off the ones that we've missed in the UK, but ideally we can also use that to, it's not trivial, but we could do that to do it for the entire planet. We've just done the UK in this project, but, the big goal is let's try and map all the solar panels on the planet, and then together with, meteorological data and so on, for large countries, whether it's China, USA, India, all of these countries should be able to benefit from being able to, predict at fine resolution their solar generation. And if the goal of this project is measured in tons of carbon dioxide equivalent reduction, there's a certain amount we achieve by reducing emissions in the UK. But if someone in the USA or someone in India takes our method and applies it, that's so much more impact potentially. And so we're really interested to talk to people who want to kind of reproduce the work in different countries or take it forwards.
Arms there, Dan.
Exactly.
It's really fascinating. I just to sort of reiterate what you said there. Of course, you could get this to apply in other countries by getting more people to edit OpenStreetMaps in other countries. But what you're suggesting is that there could be a way that requires a lot less human effort, which is to use the fact that you've already got this labeled data set of different kinds of solar panels and solar farms, feed that into a machine learning algorithm, and which could then identify from other satellite imagery, I guess it would be satellite imagery, what the solar panels and solar farms are in other areas outside of the UK. And that could be, I guess, I don't know if when it comes to satellite imagery, would you then have to use OpenStreetMaps again, or could you then use, any satellite imagery?
I don't know what the answer is for the whole planet because different solutions might apply in different places. By default, we use satellite imagery, but for example, in the UK, there's a company, there are a few different companies, but one that we're working with is called Blue Sky, and they do aerial, imagery taken from aeroplanes. So they fly planes, and so obviously that's closer to the Earth and can be in higher resolution. So you can gather high resolution data that way. You can also imagine, obviously, that we might think about drones and other whizzy things. But yes, things such as aerial imagery taken from planes or perhaps from satellites could be the source of this. But OpenStreetMap itself doesn't have aerial imagery. We're always relying on images from other providers.
Okay. But I guess, I mean, again, to use the example of Google Maps, that there's at least one example of where there's, satellite imagery coverage of pretty much the entire world. But I'm sure there are many other data sets as well, perhaps not so proprietary.
I want to tell you one thing, and this is important for people like us who are, I think most of us living in big, rich cities in the rich world. If you go so the big, rich cities actually get a lot of extra imagery taken at extra resolution and more often. So they're higher resolution and more up to date. Even if you go to the countryside in our own countries, let alone go to a poorer country, you'll find that a source such as Google Maps, which is using their own data but also bringing in imagery from other different providers, you'll find that what seems to be the same source has high quality and high recency in some places and low quality and low recency in other places. So the picture is really mixed, and I don't know what the situation is across the planet, but it does depend on different priorities.
Are you suggesting actually then that because of that inconsistency in different areas, that kind of data might not be ideal for an algorithm that's trained to identify based on a certain type of image?
Now, here's the thing, right? So we work on machine learning, and to do machine vision, where you go, okay, here's a data set, now do some machine vision. You can people have their ways of doing it, but machine learning academics might want an interesting challenge to solve that is, a research question. So now here's the research question. We give you a load of data about UK solar panels with images taken from a plane flying over the UK. Now, let's try and solve that problem for India, where we've got imagery taken from a satellite, so very different resolution, very different landscape. This is a very, very different kind of the problems involved in sort of training a detector in one place and applying it in another place. It's a massive problem, and it's kind of it's talked about in machine learning, but here's a great example of where you could solve, or at least work on, these problems while also solving something that's great for humanity.
That's another call to arms. So if there's any machine learning researchers listening, then here you go. There's another data set. Get stuck in. Dan, thanks very much for joining us on the podcast today. It's been fascinating to hear about a project. Well, I already knew about it personally myself, but it's been fascinating to learn more about the kind of stuff that's been being done in data science to meet the climate crisis. I'm going to ask you a bonus question, which is all about that very topic. And, feel free to answer this in whatever way you see fit. But the question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is we're pretty much doomed, and 10 is we've got the situation fully under control, how would you rate our global society's preparedness for climate change? And, you can answer that both from a technological or societal perspective.
That's a question I didn't particularly see coming. Wow, that's a big one. Yeah, okay. I've got to sort of say up front that, I don't think I'm the person to answer that question. But, we can all make our own sort of educated guesses about these things. I've worked on one corner of the problem, and I don't really have the overall solution. It's incredibly hard to think of some way that I can answer that that's useful. I think, we know that there've been a whole load of problems in sort of in galvanizing the collective action, and turning the ship has been incredibly slow, and that's really held things back. But what's inspiring is that people with lots of different backgrounds have sort of come in and worked on these from different angles. So although we don't spend as much money on climate change as we do on, let's say, although we don't spend as much money for AI for climate change as we do on AI for defense, we are improving in those regards. And I think, in a funny sort of a sense, there's this kind of crowdsourced response where, whatever is coming top down from government to solve climate change is doing something, but really there's bottom up, which is from individual citizens, people starting their own business, people sort of changing their career a little bit and trying to do something slightly different, or at least contribute in some way. It's clear that the majority of people know that this is serious and it's kind of all hands on deck and we're all having a go at it. I have no idea how to answer your question about the scale of 1 to 10. I really don't. But
I think you're experiencing a bit of maybe it's Dunning-Kruger effect. Is it Dunning-Kruger where yes. Where because you're a researcher, you know how much you don't know, and you're not confident to make any big claims, which is probably a very good thing, really. But but I think what you're getting at there is really important, which is that there's potentially quite a lot of work that could be done in AI or data science for climate work, and such as yours.
There was this comment from Jack Kelly a little while ago about whether more research was needed, and so there's this thing you hear sometimes, which is that more research is not needed. We have all the solutions. We just need to implement them, and that's true. On the other hand, what Jack's response is that we need a heck of a lot of research in how to do the implementation.
Right.
So in a way, it's a kind of question of definitions, but we don't need blue skies research into new forms of silicon that are going to, do crazy things. I mean, we need a little bit of that research, but we don't need to plunge all of society's resources into crazy blue skies things. What we do need to plunge all of society's resources into is the engineering and sort of working the solutions all the way through to implementation. And that involves academics and business and all kinds of people, especially the power industry and all these other things.
I think your research here is a really good example of that, because it's like, we're not saying, oh, let's put loads of money into nuclear fusion and hope for the best. It's like saying, okay, well, we've identified that already that the solar energy is clearly increasingly, almost exponentially, you said. So maybe we should try and keep tabs on exactly what's going on and where it is.
I think I speak in the name of everyone that we're happy that you didn't instantly respond that we're all doomed.
Yeah.
So I think everyone is quite happy that there is some questions and not just the bleak end of 2020.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's certainly going to be some pain, because we know that we've missed various climate targets and so on. And let's not end the conversation on the subject of the pain, but we know that humanity muddles through in various ways, and you can see some of that happening in what we've discussed.
Absolutely. That's a relatively positive note to end on there. So, Dan, thanks again very much for coming on the podcast. Before we let you go, where can people find out more about your work, and do you have social media that people can follow?
Yeah, yep, absolutely. So if you just search for my name, Dan Stowell, on Twitter, that's where I post a few things. But my website is mcld.co.uk, which is a strange domain name. So just Google for me. That's fine.
It's openstreetmap.org, if I remember correctly, if people want to get involved there. Map.org,
yeah, that openstreetmap.org is the place to go if you're interested in geographic data and mapping in general. I would definitely encourage anyone interested in the climate angle to go to openclimatefix.org. So this is the non-profit that I've talked about that is sort of trying to do all this work, and they've got various projects on the go, and various ways that people can get involved. So openclimatefix.org is a good place to look.
We'll leave it there. Dan Stowell, thanks very much for coming on.
That was fascinating, thank you.
Great to talk to you, thanks.
If you have an interesting topic you'd like featured on the show, a guest recommendation or a burning question, email podcast@turing.ac.uk.
The Turing Podcast is hosted by Ed Cowstrew, B. Costa Gomez and Joe Dungate, and produced by Dan Whitfield for the Alan Turing Institute.
Music for the podcast was provided by Jam and Sun. You can check out his latest releases at jamandsun.bandcamp.com.